everybody. Thanks for watching this episode of HITRUST Secrets. I'm Sue Richards, joined with Donna Dodson and Steve Dufour. I'm very happy to have Ryan Boerner on here today from Keep Aware. We talked a week or so ago, I think, about ways that we could do security awareness training without fatiguing the end users, especially the ones that don't click the bad links, that don't go to the risky websites. You've got to put it in front of them when you're doing security awareness training, in addition to the people that are actually doing that. And uh, Steve had talked about, working with Keep Aware before and just saying, it's almost like an immediate on-demand phishing and training awareness, security awareness training for those people. So it's like, okay, you didn't get it when we did the annual review, you didn't get it when we did the monthly phishing test, you didn't get it when you went into remedial training. So now you're going to get it every single time you click on a weird link. So, Ryan, can you kind of talk to us about Keep Aware, kind of, your background and all of that?
Yeah, absolutely. And if it makes sense to share a couple slides or
Yeah,
share my
definitely.
screen, I'd be happy to. So, I guess my 2 cents on Donna, what you had mentioned earlier. I listened to the last week's episode where you're talking about the difference between HITRUST and SOC 2. And it even got me thinking about how we present our SOC 2 to our customers. So maybe from the other side, but being a startup, we're probably in a similar boat in that we're often getting questions outside of the report of the SOC 2 that we're having to kind of fill. Um, on a case by case basis. So I thought last week's was interesting. I was going to add that. But sure, happy to share my screen and then go through just a quick company background. You'll see that a lot of how we architected what we've built today is really centered around the web browser. But of course, the name of the company is Keep Aware for all of the reasons that Susan you had mentioned. So I'll go ahead and share my full desktop here so I can jump around. But can you see this deck here?
Yes.
So there's really two big focuses of the platform today. There's the secure browsing element, which you'll see, throughout this part of the presentation, but then also Gen AI. It's just a place that we're getting a lot of questions right now on how employees are interacting with all of these tools that they're adopting within the company and what types of guardrails the IT or security team has over those tools. Just a little bit about the company. We're a startup based in Austin, Texas. Most of our folks are here in Austin with myself and Steve, but we're mostly coming from a security operations background. We ultimately found that we were tired of investigating the exact attempts that you had mentioned, Susan, people clicking on links and not really knowing where it came from or what information was entered in the moment. And the security operations team ultimately struggling with the same thing. We see over, maybe the firewall, if we're able to pull up logs or other tools, what destinations were involved, but there was ultimately a problem of that tooling kind of showing us what happened in the moment when something really mattered. Did someone, lose their password? Was it related to Microsoft or some other system that we have in place where we need to go and reset their credentials? And so the sort of sales statement or thesis behind the company is around this idea that security tools are ultimately wrapped around the browser where more and more work is happening within it. And just very quickly here, we're coming from companies where we're on the network detection and response or email security side at these other vendors. And we really saw this amplified during COVID around 2020, where everyone went to go work from home and more applications and just work activity just being piped through the browser caused this gap in understanding of what was being clicked on from a high risk standpoint in the company, and then how to remediate that. Um, and I think that's for a couple of reasons. I mentioned COVID, but I think that the attack landscape, at least from an external point of view, people have realized that if they can get an employee inside of the web browser and just in the moment, lack of judgment on where I'm, pasting in or logging in or some sort of warning, there's just a large social engineering kind of landscape that someone has access to if they
Yeah.
can get you inside of the web browser. The second one is kind of tied to that point of the browser being the operating system. More and more SaaS applications have moved to be browser based. We're seeing this happen with our clients where they're taking traditional on-prem applications and over the last 5 to 10 years have really been moving things to the cloud. But then you look at how identity is ultimately linked to what we do, and between the use of password managers and single sign-on, there's a lot of context and activity that's happening within the browser to govern, where identities are used. And then I bring up AI as just the topic that a lot of folks want to discuss. I like to call the browser the interface of choice as it relates to AI, because you'll see these applications get developed there first. And this is continuing to be true with the release of new technologies around WebMCP or agents being able to use the browser. And it's a whole mess, but it continues to kind of evolve in a way where the browser's important. And so I'll get to maybe more specific examples as it relates to HITRUST, but just very quickly, our platform is a browser security platform. And so while KeepAware's mission is to protect people against people-targeted threats, it's really this idea that 85% of most information work is taking place inside the web browser. So if there's a place that we can add value along with what you might be already doing over the network or email security tools, it's really this landscape. So we have a bunch of kind of modules that form this product, but ultimately what it is a browser extension. It gets deployed out to Chrome, Edge, Firefox, Safari. There's about 15 different browsers that we support. So the goal is to just kind of be browser agnostic, deploy silently to work machines, devices, but also, bring your own device situations where someone could operate from a work branded web browser when they're doing their work. But the idea is that it sits passively until that point in time, Susan, where someone gets noticed in the moment that something might be wrong or that company policy might need to be implemented. And so our goal is to ultimately make the browser observable for high risk activities to the security team, with an ability to kind of investigate and collect evidence after the fact if some policy violation or some threat were to occur. But then two and three is really about that. We call it point of click. At that moment, is there a coachable moment, but is there also something that we could stop in real time, just in that interface before a threat occurs? So I'll pause there, and I want to show some real examples, but just wanted to give some company and just product context. Any questions from the group before I sort of show some examples? Or Steve, I saw you come off mute there.
Yeah. Well, I had been using the product for a number of years. So, um, at the start of the company and the vision you had for the company, so right there, and then fast forward to today, how has your vision and mission for the company evolved over time? Because I remember at the conference we initially spoke, we spoke at, you were a vendor at the conference, and I kind of cornered you to pick your brain. I was looking for a solution of the inventory of browser extensions initially, right? And so fast forward to today, what does it look like now?
So that's still a very popular use case for us. And I think that the mission was ultimately focused on anti-phishing. Again, coming from security operations, we were seeing things just get through email that would otherwise not be prevented by anything over the network, primarily because some tactics and techniques that attackers were using in the browser, they were using legitimate Microsoft or Cloudflare or infrastructure to host these attacks. And so there was really no way to see that it was malicious versus legitimate. And I'm sure you've all seen some form of, fake DocuSigns or Adobe sign type of emails where they're using legitimate services to facilitate the attack. Um, but it really started there. We were seeing these things get through. Um, but coming back to the point that the first name of our company, this would have been in 2022, was Keep Aware, there was always this idea that there is a risk between, some people frame it as there's a risk between the keyboard and the chair. And ultimately, there's some sort of decision that has to be made in the moment, and this is in the thousands per day that people are making decisions. And so, if you consider that as a layer where you can apply some of the detection engineering principles that we're applying, more to physical traffic and these emails, it really came back to that point. And so how has that changed? We've seen the tactics, the techniques and procedures that attackers are using change quite a bit as well. I would call 2023 the year of browser extensions being bought to be turned into malware. People realized, oh, I can go buy a browser extension for, let's say, $1,000 from a developer that might have 10,000 or so people already using this browser extension, and then push malicious updates to it as it goes out.
Hmm.
Um, I'd say the last year was really the year of click fix. So if you're familiar with these types of attacks, and I might be able to show an example here real quick of that one, um, just to start us off here.
So this is a browser extension that you as an end user had been trusting forever, and then suddenly there's malicious code in it, which, yeah,
Absolutely.
it never ceases to
Absolutely.
amaze me how creative the bad guys get with this kind of stuff.
Well, it's a movement over time
Hmm.
where some gap gets filled, and the I would say supply chain risk like this really didn't become super relevant until 2016. I'd say SolarWinds was the big uh, sort of moment that people started focusing on this. But then you think of all the way software gets installed on a machine. Now someone framed it at times that attackers only have to be right one time, whereas defenders have to be right all the time. And so they just find any new channel that they can get to start doing the same types of fundamentally the same types of attacks, but it's just now in a different place. And we're seeing that with let me pull up an example here real quick. But to kind of come back to your uh, question, Steve, I think that it's trying to almost remove ourselves from these individual cases or these individual problems and look at what the kind of underlying theme is with all three of these, the phishing, the extensions. It's really someone's trying to get in front of the employee. And so if we can be that company that uh, recognizes that and can kind of sit across the interfaces that they use, that's really driving the addition of BYOD, the addition of mobile browser security. um, and I'd say we've relatively remained true to what we had started. But I'll
Hmm.
show this ClickFix example because I think it'll be a good start to showing you kind of how this platform works. But uh, I'll go to this site that we host, and we see this all of the time where the screen or a website gets compromised and starts pushing fake browser updates as these almost like advertisements to the employee. And you'll see Keepware kind of block this screen to begin with. This is going to be, more common of what you'd see from a web filter. But I'll show you an example here where Keepware's giving you a notice, hey, this looks like a fake website. We had actually blocked it. But if I try to follow the instructions here, it'll actually have me try to copy
Wow.
malicious PowerShell to my keyboard, and keyboard can actually step in the moment and prevent that script from being copied to the clipboard. They're actually having someone run, if you're on a Windows device, the runner, and just paste this command right into your machine. um, Oftentimes it's a command and control. It's actually pulling down malware and running it directly in PowerShell. So now you've gone from, hey, we just got to watch out for sites and where people put their passwords, to someone's actually completely operating now outside of the web browser, because this is really easy to fall for.
Mhm.
If you didn't know otherwise, you would have thought it was just a new form of CAPTCHA, because we continue to see all these weird ways that we've got to verify, we're a human.
Mhm.
So just another example of, one of these, browser TTPs, if you will. Um, I'll pause there. Just I know I jumped from Steve's question into a bit of rabbit hole there, but Susan or anyone else have thoughts on or questions around just generally what the tech is first?
Well,
Um,
here,
oh,
go ahead.
oh, okay. So I do. Well, a little bit more about specific nuanced functionality. So one of the issues with AI that I regularly work with clients, because I have clients who are really excited about AI. And part of what I try to instill at minimum is that their users log in before, so if they've purchased an enterprise solution or something from an AI provider, that they require the people in their organization to log in before they go sharing information. And I was just curious whether or not that nuance is something that your solution offers, to not only require them to log in, but potentially in a work environment to require them to log in with a specific exchange, on their email address, so that anything
Right.
they're entering is properly protected in the context of the client's relationship. There are other things that I would prefer to do, but in some of my client organizations, this is like the baseline for what I can encourage.
Right, right. The short answer would be yes, but the I'll jump to maybe a more specific example there. Um, when I'm working with our clients on creating policy or implementing policy within Keepware, I think about two broad buckets. We have a lot of this kind of out of the box for external based threats. It's something that most, if not all, of our clients rely on just a feed that we have to detect these things in the moment. Um, the second bucket is really around internal risk and just not necessarily folks acting out of, malintent, but to your point, just following policy and guidance in the company, and sort of implementing the company's best practices.
Mhm.
When we're designing policy in that second bucket, we're focused on right now three dimensions. So one is destination. So where are people actually going out on the web, and what tools are in use? Should they even be in use in the first place? The second is data. And so what actually gets involved in a particular prompt or an upload or interaction with these tools. And then the third is identity. So are they using that company federated account to do that business, or are they using a personal account? And unfortunately, the way that these tools get built is it really doesn't matter for a big vendor whether you're on a personal or work account. And in fact, they might, design the tool in such a way where it's so easy to use your personal account, because of course they have different ways that they can train and use that data if you're under that personal account versus on some sort of enterprise
Mhm.
plan. And so not necessarily pointing at any one company there, but I think there's almost, you've got to look at where the incentives are. There's almost an
Mhm.
incentive for people to be kind of using a free account to use all of these tools with all of the information that they have access
Yeah,
to.
yeah.
But when you think about the context within the browser, you have access to all those three data points. And so absolutely could start to think about policy. And I'll show an example of how that might work or be reported on specifically for identity. But Donna, any other kind of thoughts on that before I continue there?
No, that's all right. Thank you. I appreciate it.
Absolutely. So let me jump to a screen here. We are a SaaS product, so when you think about all of those extensions going out to employee web browsers, there's ultimately metadata that comes back to a central place for an IT security team. There's a lot of different areas in the platform that we could go into, but I think to kind of keep it simple today, I'll just first share that this gets pushed out typically through like an MSI or some sort of package-based installer to these machines. And its goal is to ultimately coordinate and understand what browsers even firstly exist on the device. This isn't something, and maybe comes back to a point that you mentioned, Steve. We didn't see the kind of AI browsers get released when we first started the company. Everyone was really on Chrome and Edge, Firefox, and maybe Safari. But since the last year, I think there's 5 AI browsers now outside of Chrome and Edge that have millions of users. You look at what Perplexity is doing. ChatGPT has ChatGPT Atlas. You have the Dia browser. There's just now a whole other software ecosystem that a team implementing some sort of certification would need to catalog and understand that these are being used inside of the company. From there are I'll just show an example. All of these browser activities that ultimately get streamed back to the platform. So we're not a tunnel or proxy in that we're not actually seeing the raw contents of, let alone sending that to the platform. It's really high level metadata around the files that are being uploaded, pages that are being visited, downloads, and that's all configurable to how much data collection based on requirements the company needs. From there, there are individual instances that we could log and actually show data on. Let's say, a specific upload to ChatGPT could be seen within the platform. But where we start is ultimately around that destination data and identity. So this is just one of the reports that we have that's breaking down the AI use in the company. You can see which tools are in use within the organization that fall into these, AI or an AI-enabled type of category, which new applications are showing up purely based on usage. So we don't integrate with any, while we do have integrations, it's not required to detect new applications. So to your point, Donna, one of the things we see from more of the audit type platforms is integrate with that SSO provider so you can see the apps that employees are using. But what if they're on a work machine and they are using the free version of an application, they're not signing in, or they're using a personal account? We detect that based on just pure usage of the browser. And then from a data standpoint, that second dimension, showing what data types are ultimately going to these various applications. This involves, PII, which would be more standard identifiers for people, PHI, which uses a bit of proximity and other types of detection to find things like ICD-10 terms and other identifiers, but then also just broader categories for the company, financial information, and seeing both from individual prompts, but uploads, not the actual contents themselves, but this is the browser saying, for this event, we saw these data tags get met. That can help inform policy and, even know where that exposure might live today. And then finally, to get to kind of your question, that identity piece around account detection. So are people using the free version of this tool versus, are they using personal or work accounts to transact? And so just starting from a visibility standpoint, getting an understanding that there are tools that are at risk here that we could dive further into. Or I think it's okay to allow people to use personal accounts on a work device, as long as the guardrails sort of match what the company policy is. If you want to do a quick Google search, maybe it's okay to use a certain account, but if you're asking to summarize or work on an email, or even a step further, uploading company documents and information, it needs to be under those specific accounts.
And that's of course where I get very uncomfortable from a risk, a data risk perspective, because a lot of those guardrails have been there in the past, but AI really changes the game. So can I, drag across a document that has, data in it, data which could include PHI or PPI or a client list. It doesn't have to be a healthcare specific situation. My top clients, and I've given my notice and I'm going to take that client list with me, and I upload it into an acceptable AI tool, but I've done it under my personal account, which means when I go home and log on using my personal account, there it is.
Right.
And that's very concerning from a risk perspective for organizations that have historically disallowed things like Dropbox or other things where people could have personal logons and then be able to access those files. That's why the little mini drives and stuff are all disallowed specifically within high risk or very sensitive data environments. So this is where AI has, there are some really powerful things about AI, but there are also some unchecked risks at this point.
I think there's just an important point that you brought up there, and kind of what is the difference between how we maybe have done this before. And I mentioned maybe the tools are easier to use between personal and work context than, let's say, what business and personal applications were 10 years ago. But another element of this is you have the company simultaneously acknowledging the risk, but also on the opposite side, who doesn't want to tell their employees to take advantage of all of the productivity gains and value that these tools have to offer? And so you kind of leave employees in this state of, should I be doing this or should I not? I want to perform well for my job, but not understanding what the policies are there is a pretty serious risk. And so what we've ultimately designed around is, and again, I might have assumed that this conversation would drift towards AI because it's just the most relevant today, but this applies to several areas of just how the browser gets used. And so we've kind of created this library of, here are different guardrails that might need to be put in place within a company branded web browser. And then they get implemented through individual policies. So if I was just jumping to see where mine might be here. If I wanted to create a new acceptable use policy around AI here, I'll just bring up this basic one as an example. I can define the activity that I'm concerned with. You said dragging and dropping a file, which I'll show an example of, but this one's just purely a page visit to an AI tool. And maybe we include, approved tools to not apply here, as we've already got enterprise agreements in place with, particular companies. And so we could say something like, I want to remove an approved applications list from this detection. And so you're designing where this policy applies, and you get very deep on kind of what you're designing around, and Steve might be able to attest to that. But in terms of designing the safeguard, you can then put your company's branding and message, and folks are linking to their internal usage policies that they've created from these, say, in that moment when these conditions occur, this is the guardrail that we want to have in place. And so why I show this example first is because if I were to go to something like ChatGPT in our organization, you'll see that I get a usage policy that references our internal documentation, and I get this every 7 days that I'm using um,
Mhm.
ChatGPT. So this is more of a preventative type of control. It's not going to actually stop me from using the tool itself, but this is usually where people start with that first dimension destination. So let's define what tools are even allowed to be used, and then for those that we need to inform employees of some policy, let's do that at the right moment. Now, if I were to do exactly what you had just mentioned, where I try to drag some, we work with some folks in healthcare, and when they're checking on, residents or patients, they're writing SOAP notes. So I'm going to drag a SOAP note into my, personal ChatGPT instance, and you see another guardrail that I've put in place. This has PHI data in it. It also has some PII. That combined with the context or the fact that it's going to a personal account pauses me in the moment. Now, most of what I show in a demonstration has these pauses where someone can accept the risk and continue, and that gets logged on the other end. But you can put full on restrictions in place for these activities as well. And so that's why, again, kind of come back to this point of interface security is it's sitting right in that moment where a decision can be made. It's not sending that file over the network to, a provider like OpenAI unless the company says that it's allowed.
Right. How deep do your relationships run with like the Chat GPT platform? So let's say the person sees that notification and goes, oh, right. So the company knows if I'm logged in on my personal account. So I'm going to use my business account. I'm going to upload the file I want. I'm going to go home. I'm going to log on to Chat GPT using my business account and download the file. So is there a way for people where, like in the relationship that you have with ChatGPT, to identify that and raise it up for the employer, or do they need to create some I mean, I realize that I'm reaching at this point, but I'm thinking
Yeah.
through all the things that people do. In some cases, not necessarily with bad intentions.
Right.
They're going to work on a file later, right? They're exhausted. They want to leave the office. For those who are still working in an office, they want to go home, they want to have dinner, and then they're going to work on the file, right? Good intentions, but they're stepping outside the parameters that they're supposed to stay in. And does your solution offer a centralized way for employers to actually see when that's happening?
So I'll answer that question in two parts. One
Okay.
is that the way that we operate is actually pretty agnostic from any single vendor. And so our relationship with someone like OpenAI or ChatGPT, we're not necessarily needing to rely on what they provide here to put safeguards or guardrails in place. It's purely from the browser and just passive understanding of these different tools.
Mhm.
And so it means that we've seen people actually wrap their own ChatGPT API keys, and like ChatGPT123.com got registered, 4 days ago. This still gets recognized and can be blocked in a similar way, even though it's a completely, different or new tool. Now, the second part, your question mainly around where that corporate, policy gets introduced is that
Yeah.
if someone doesn't have keepware on their personal device, and that's okay from the company standpoint, that they're able to use these other devices to access SaaS and corporate accounts, then we look at something more like IDP enforcement, where you would have to even be able to sign into single sign-on, use the Keepaware extension on a profile of that browser. And so when we look at bring your own device situations, we could completely prevent someone from signing in to like a Microsoft single sign-on or these other types of identity providers because they don't have Keepware plugged in. And I would almost view it like a 2FA at that point, where Keepware could say, this is not a connected browser. We should not allow this to be logged in. But that's why we have this BYOD use case. They can actually define, I've got something like 7 browser profiles within Chrome, but one of them I have dedicated to work. So I know I can sign in with my business accounts
Mhm.
through that profile. But then it also is a guarantee that those keep aware policies can be applied just to that profile. I could go use the rest of my browser or other browsers on my personal device, and the company wouldn't have any sort of hook into that to see what's happening. It's still your browser. It's
Mhm.
really just that profile now that becomes kind of that governed landscape, and it carries over, the same safeguards or policies that you'd see here.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, and one example that I share here because it's on the more strict side of what we've seen clients do. So we've had someone set up something similar here, and when they detect a certain browser is in use, they'll actually block all downloads to that browser. So when you think about someone, being on a personal device, they might be able to work within these tools, and we don't want to prevent them. But if they're trying to put something like a client list on their local desktop, it's going to prevent that from even, being either copied out of the browser or downloaded.
Mhm. Okay, thank you.
Yeah.
Yeah, what I like about this is, it moves that security awareness training from theoretical, because people are like, oh yeah, yeah, don't click the link to, oh, this is what this means. And, it really drives it home to, oh, that's what they meant when they talked about, this or that in a phishing example and things. It's one thing to see it in a completely different industry or whatever. But then when it's, the actual sites you're going to or the work that you're doing, I really think it drives it home. And I wonder, Steve, you probably had some of your end users that were like, oh, that makes, it makes them a little more savvy as far as what they're looking at.
And the feedback that I got for the tool was overall just positive because it's not a spin, it's just kind of the way it is. I come from the security focus of if my end users can't keep up with something, like then that's kind of on me. So I want to give them as many tools as possible that are as transparent as possible to make more informed decisions. And so what it boils down to, and Ryan, I was going to ask you about this, but like we also have to be like just aware of how much time we have left. There's so much metadata for a particular website of what it is and what it's doing that can be used to help block and inform decisions. So, for example, and I forget the terminology for it, but one of them that I think I remember for keep aware is the spine,
Oh
right?
yeah,
And
yeah.
various metadata. So, for example, one of the things that attackers do is they spin up a new website that has all of this HTML and JavaScript running there, and it looks exactly like a Microsoft website. It was just spun up two hours ago. That is a thing that you can
Hmm.
make decisions off of, right? And inform your user, right?
Mm.
Whether or not to put a pop-up in front of them like, hey, this website is fairly new. This may not be what you think of it. Another example of an investigation was this actually happened where an executive, don't ask me why he was doing this. He was hosting a webinar for a dozen people or so, right? Answering their questions, doing slideshow presentation, doing all this stuff. He kept getting a notification, not from KeepAware, but something to update his operating system. It was one of those flashy things, right? He's like, I don't know how this got on there. And so I looked, did research. He went to a website, he got some kind of pop up for notifications. And then after that, it kept popping up. And when he clicked on that thing, it did the whole flashy screen thing, like the browser is at risk, you need to update, and it gave a 1-800 number, right? So using the tool, I was able to backtrack exactly where it happened and then also create a policy to help block those websites. Because from my end user standpoint, was like, okay, I still want them to be able to work. And at the same time, quickly implement a fix that also allowed them to be trained at the same time to make better decisions in the future.
Mhm. Yeah.
Yeah, I'd say while there's about 80 or so of these types of policies that are presented out of the box. Our whole approach has been to not necessarily be a black box, and that you can see the 300 or so fields that we've tied to an individual event. And it's not uncommon now that folks will say, if a website is less than 6 months old on the internet, whether it's legitimate or not, that's already a small fraction of just internet traffic. And so being able to put some sort of, even if it's just a label for the security team that they can report on, being able to put that in place, I'd say, has become pretty popular. And to that point, for policy violations, I've got a screen shared here where I've clicked on that individual event of me dragging and dropping that note into my browser, and you can see that I was paused. I ended up, not going through with it, but breaking down again destination data and identity within that single event. Um, and so from an audit trail uh, perspective, it's also very helpful to be able to search and kind of build reports on
Hmm.
what is that exposure in the company today as it relates to individual types of data or um, destinations people are going to.
Yeah, and that helps prioritize because it sounds like you can kind of level up and step up the level of security and restrictions. So you can kind of start it with just that monitoring, but then use this to see, okay, where is the biggest thing? Because, I worked at a dental service organization sending out treatment plans to clients without using a secure email became more rampant than we had ever thought because it was, all these different offices and we didn't have that ability to see that from a central location. So that helped with that. We were able to use it with just an email, but similar happening if they were pulling treatment plans maybe down from where we kept the health records or things. So yeah, I like the fact that it monitors it and then just like that, helps you with, okay, phase two, this is what we're going to lock down.
Yeah, I think one way I've heard people frame it is that it operates in sort of this gray area where having something like a notice or a pause um, is very effective, because previously you would have had to decide, is this worth blocking, for the whole company, and we're risking now sort of the productivity of our people, or just getting in their face too much to where the security organization becomes annoying and yeah, untrustworthy by the user, or we're going to just have to completely allow it. And I think you will see more and more just controls and tools that fall in that middle range, because every company is going to operate slightly different. So being able to start with just that visibility, and then, working your way up to here's what that company profile really looks and feels like is uh, absolutely the approach there.
Yeah, and then to have the ability to say, okay, for this particular, for these sites or however you've grouped it, to be able to say, okay, well, don't put that restriction here, but put
Mhm.
that restriction here. And you probably can, obviously, I think, probably put it also on different roles or departments that somebody's in.
Right,
So, hey, if they're within finance, then yes, they can do this, or absolutely never let finance do, XYZ.
right, right.
But interesting. I love it. And then also from a reporting perspective, I think from a compliance and governance perspective, it helps with being able to see, because I know auditors are always looking for, not just the fact that phishing training has happened, but that the specific content or context of what was reviewed is report this or something like that. And if you've got this where you can say, yes, they saw a screen that not only said, you know, this link is
Absolutely.
risky, report it through to our security team. That helps with being able to prove out that you're doing that. And, there are some people that you do want to kind of bug about security because they keep hitting the limits. And
Right.
there's others that are doing the right thing and you're like, okay, maybe you don't need, so it's more of that that smart way of working that, yeah, I for you, you're constantly going around policies. I do want it to bug you. I do want
Right.
it to show you all the time and probably lock it down for you until you can, behave better.
Right. I'd say what we see as it relates to um, getting certifications is really just threefold. It's first invent building an inventory and cataloging and just having a constant awareness of what the company is using from a tooling perspective. It's that protection element which you mentioned. We have, phishing protection and controls in place. We have, we are blocking these categories of website just out the gate. But then that third one, and I think it's overlooked as it relates to the browser because just knowing what happened in the moment, there's always this question of we see the connections to those sites, but what was what was the actual file or credentials or what got used in that moment? Because that completely changes how we would respond to this, and just being able
Mhm.
to have a trail for that, I think is really helped, and one that Stephen mentioned.
Well, great. Well, Ryan, thank you so much. And
Yeah.
we'll definitely, when we post this, the recording, we'll also include a link to that State of the Browser Security report that you
Yeah,
mentioned at the beginning. So really
yeah,
looking
that'd be
forward to it.
great.
So, Ryan, this is a small group, but we have powerful conversations and folks like you coming on, we really appreciate it.
We
I
do.
appreciate the opportunity, and I love the questions. So please, if you want to reach out to me directly, it's ryan@keepaware.com. But our State of Browser Security report covers five challenge areas of the browser, including Gen AI and all of these new tactics that we're seeing be used against employees. So absolutely check it out.
Great.
Excellent. Thanks
All
so
right.
much.